Well, the reason for it not growing exponentially is that it reaches some kind of limit. And so ecologists introduced a second parameter, K, which is usually referred to as carrying capacity. And the first equation was modified to give you the second equation. So now it depends on two parameters: the rate of increase when the population is small and the limit that it reaches. Because you could say that as x gets closer to k, 1 minus x gets closer to 0, and the growth would slow down. So if you plotted that second equation, it would be a curve rising up and flattening out. And even though we think of it as carrying capacity, it could have a lot of other causes. The reason for introducing this modified equation from the point of view of traditional ecology was simply to show that there's a carrying capacity, that things don't grow forever. It's possible that a species can grow very rapidly in the beginning and then slow down and taper off quickly. Or it could grow very slowly but do it for a very long time and reach a high peak. So conceptually, R and K are different properties of species dynamics. All right, now, once we were skeptical of the first equation, we can start being skeptical of the second. Remember what R means. R is a rate of reproduction, which is offspring minus mortality. So if R is positive, the population grows. If R is negative, it decreases. It might be negative, for instance, if it's too hot, if the physical conditions are unsuitable. So therefore, we introduce the possibility that R might be negative under extreme conditions. And clearly, if R is 0, the population doesn't change. K is the carrying capacity. As long as x is less than k, 1 minus x over k is less than 1. And so the population will be growing. R times 1 minus x over k. And the pattern will be rising slowly and leveling off. And then, it comes up to k.
Can we close the door, please? Thank you.
But once we've gone from Model 1 to Model 2, it's supposed to emphasize that models themselves are intellectual constructs which sometimes work and sometimes don't. That first equation was pretty good for the growth of bacteria on a petri dish when the problem was to separate species. It doesn't work if you leave them in the petri dish too long. Then you start getting ecological effects, interactions, and so on. So now let's look at the second equation. Remember, if R is positive, these species should increase. If R is negative, it should decrease. If X is less than K, there's positive population growth. If X gets greater than K, population would decrease. The X can be greater than K if K decreases, or if there's a big spurt of growth beyond K. So now here comes the punchline. Suppose that the population is too big, greater than carrying capacity. But in addition, the environment is too harsh, so that R is negative. So you look at the mathematics, and it says negative times negative is positive. The equation tells you if the environment is too harsh for a species, and in addition it's too crowded, then it will grow. So this is one of the nonsense results you get with mathematics. And it's important to understand that a mathematical model is an intellectual construct designed to help us answer some questions, but not others. We've worked with models since the earliest times. For instance, a map, in the geographic sense, is a model. When you had the map, after a while the kids learn, it's like about 4th grade or so, that up on the map means north, down on the map means south, to the right means east, to the left means west. Places closer together on the map are closer together on the ground. A large area in orange stands for a big city. So we learn to read a map, realizing that the map is not the reality. And in fact, if you put a map under a microscope, what you see is the pigment it's printed with, rather than greater insights into Boston. So it's always important to understand the fallibility of a map. What did we put into it for what purpose? Does it serve that purpose? And when does it break down? Any questions about this? This is perhaps the most important lesson about modeling. That models are not reality, they're representations. And that representation cannot be the reality, or you might as well study the reality itself.
Can I ask a question about making such a model for more reading in case you have discrete
Yes.
populations during the difference equations?
Right. There's no single best model. Models have their uses and their confusions. And because of this, my approach to ecology or to other modeling questions is to say that you need a cluster of models, each of which captures some aspect of reality, but alerts you to ways in which the model is either wrong or insufficient. They're not quite the same thing. A model can be insufficient. For instance, in the first equation, R was written there as a parameter. That pretends that R is constant. What would happen if R is varying? That's one question. Another question is, animals reproduce at particular ages. So how do the age distribution affect R? We know that little fish hardly reproduce, and it's the big fish that produce most of the eggs. One of our students did her thesis in the Mexican state of Tabasco. The Nestle's Corporation had moved in there to graze cattle in order to produce canned milk. This was part of their infant formula campaign. What they did was cut down the forest and plant grasses. Then the milk business, the infant formula business, collapsed. The pastures were abandoned. Now, they'd never cleared completely because you couldn't get right to the edge. There are rivers in the area along which there would be trees, referred to as the gallery forest. It would be quite tall trees, well watered. Now, as soon as the pastures were abandoned, these gallery trees began, well, they were always doing it, but their seeds would land in the now abandoned pasture. And then we have to ask, well, how successful is the reproduction of the gallery tree? If the seed lands on a bare spot in the pasture, it is likely to be gathered by ants and disappear. So only a small proportion of those that land will grow. If it lands in a thicket of grass, it's protected and has a chance to germinate, sends a little rootlet down, When the root is about 1.5 inches deep, it's coming into the root mass of the grasses. So the grass, which was a protector in those first weeks, is now a competitor. The seeds continue growing, those that are able to survive that competition. It's a competition mostly for water. They get down below, and they can get below the root mass of the grass. At that point, they're no longer being competed by the grass. They grow up, and they can grow beyond the grass and shade it. At this point, the tree seedlings are wiping out the grasses. They're suppressing the grass growth. So the relationship between grass and tree changes with the maturing, particularly of the trees. This would be true in the relations of all sorts of animals, where two species may interact in such a way that each one preys on the young of the other. And so it depends on age distributions. Okay, so now ecologists have used these kinds of schemes to classify the relations among species. Visualize a table. The first column is the kind of interaction. The second column is the effect of species A on species B. The third column is the effect of species B on species A. Let's start filling in. So the first row, in the first column you write mutualism. Mutualism is a situation where each species enhances the well-being of the other. For instance, the manure of animals can provide fertilizer for plants. And the plants provide the growth, the feed for the animals. That's one kind of simple mutualism. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria are in a mutualistic relation with legumes. The legumes provide the energy and minerals. The bacteria fix the nitrogen. And you can go on and make longer and long lists showing the relations among species that enhance each other's growth. Television tends to emphasize predatory relations. In a predatory relation, you have a plus where the prey increases the predator, and the next column is a minus. Species B reduces species A. And it can be the other way around, so it's plus minus or minus plus. The third row is competition. In competition, each species has a negative effect on the growth and survival of the other. This negative effect can be that they eat the same food, but it could also be the effects that each one has on the physical structure of the environment. Grass-eating species may compete for grass. Okay. The fourth relationship is commensalism. In commensalism, species A is good for species B, but species B doesn't care about species A. One example of this is the alligator wallow. Alligators dig out little discs in the mud at the edge of a river or stream, and they love to wallow about in it. They splash, they scratch itches, whatever it is that they do. Once they're out of there, this gathers water. And so the alligator wallows are water holes, which are beneficial to ungulates, grazing animals, mice, even though the alligator no longer cares. So it's having a positive effect on the water drinkers, while the water drinkers have no effect directly on the alligator. That might have an indirect effect in that the alligator can prey on some of them when they go into the water. The next kind of interaction is amensalism. where one species harms the other, but the second species has no effect on the first. Some of the bacterial infections are of this sort, where the bacteria grow inside a host, they're finished, but they leave a poison behind. And that poison does absolutely nothing for the bacterium. It's a byproduct of its metabolism. So this is a case of amensalism. And then finally, there is the null mensalism, where two species are around, but they have no effect on each other's well-being. Any questions about this?
Can you repeat the last one, please?
Yeah, I don't remember what would be a good term.
Oh, okay.
Nullimensal. They have no effect.
And what was the first one?
The first one is mutualism.
Is mutualism like symbiotic relationship?
That's mutualism. Symbiosis is a very tight kind of mutualism. And one of the things that ecologists have been doing to get away from the prejudice that the world is competition is study the different kinds of mutualism. In John and Yvette's work, there are ants that grow on trees. The trees produce a protein from glands on the leaf. The ants use that protein, but they also eat up the harmful insects that would have fed on the tree. There are a lot of surprising kinds of relations of this sort. Some of the television programs now reveal these relations, strange pathways of interaction. Or the same two species may have